Very pleased to have in the studio with me Brian Darling. He's the Senior VP of Third Dimension Strategies. He writes for conservativereview.com, and you can tweet him at Brian H. Darling, spelled, the normal way. Yeah. Brian, welcome back to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
It's great to have you with us. You worked with and for Rand Paul's campaign for a while.
Well, I worked for his personal office. I worked in the Senate. Yeah, I never actually worked in the campaign. I feel like I've been helping out and volunteering and cheerleading for him, but I never actually worked in the campaign.
Okay. And you and I have known each other for a number of years, and I've always, while we disagree on a lot of policy issues, you're one of the reasons I'm really pleased to have you here today is you're one of the Republicans that when you say something, my sense of it is that this is actually what you believe. Sure. As opposed to some, and there are Democrats, I could say this too as well, who are basically promoting what they're paid to promote. Right. And so I'm looking forward to this conversation. I'm curious your thoughts on last night.
Well, a lot of thoughts. I was very pleased to see Rand Paul engage in a debate in foreign policy and really have it out with those other candidates so the Republicans could have a divergent view. I mean, actually having different views on stage, very different views. Rand Paul is saying that Chris Christie wants to start another world war by having a no-fly zone. And, the analogy he made where he attacked many Republicans for allying with Hillary Clinton on some foreign policy issues, I just thought it created a really interesting debate so people can see differences between the candidates and maybe figure out where they're going to end up. Right.
And when Wolf Blitzer first asked Ted Cruz, I think it was, and then, or maybe it was Trump, and then later Hugh Hewitt asked Ben Carson, here's this city in Syria with 400,000 people in it who are all civilians who didn't vote to go ISIS, and ISIS has embedded itself in that city. And these guys are talking about carpet bombing this city. Right. And when Hugh Hewitt, said to Ben Carson, "Are you willing to kill women and children, in order to get the bad guys?" And Carson, didn't give a reasonable answer at all. But the audience booed at him. What has happened to Republican audiences? Have they? Is it that we haven't had a war on U.S. soil since 1865? That we're so casual about the idea of just killing hundreds of thousands of civilians?
I think many Americans have short memories, and it wasn't that long ago, where we had an Iraq war, and still going on. At least it's been declared by the Obama administration considers us to be still at war under the AUMF of 2002, right? And in having troops still in Afghanistan. But I think people have short memories because that was an unpopular war. The reason why we have Barack Obama as president is because people were voting on the war. It was a referendum on how they felt about the Iraq war, and they overwhelmingly voted to change and put Barack Obama in office. Now, fast forward, 8 years or almost 8 years, and we have a situation where I feel like many Americans have forgotten the lessons of that election, and they're going back to policies and supporting policies that would be detrimental to Republicans winning back the White House.
Right. Ben Bernanke, who was George W. Bush's choice for Fed chairman, and did a reasonably good job, I suppose. And was a fairly outspoken and partisan Republican. Just in the last week, has renounced the Republican Party. He's got a new book out, an autobiography or memoir or whatever. And he says, I didn't leave the party left me, which is a phrase that I've been hearing, back from Bob Dole days, in fact. And I'm curious your thoughts on the state of the Republican Party right now.
Well, I think that many people like me, want to take the party back and bring it back to many of the policies that are more reasonable. I don't think that this nation-building foreign policy is popular with most Republicans. Maybe the most vocal support it, but I don't think Republicans as a whole believe in that kind of a nation-building foreign policy where we're everywhere all the time. On economic policy, I think that, one thing that's important is that the federal government's just spending, and Rand Paul talks about how one of our greatest problems in this country is our debt, that we're not doing anything to address the debt that we've accumulated over the years. And so some policies that would reinvigorate the economy, policies that would, maybe cut some of the wasteful spending out of the military and out of the domestic programs that are wasteful. I think everybody can agree that we have waste in the federal government, and they want the federal government to spend money in a better way, in a smart way. And that's not happening. So I think that you have your defense hawks who want to spend more money, Republicans, and they make this deal with many Democrats who want to keep the spending on the domestic side high. And it's a deal where nobody ever cuts any spending. So I think that people like me, I'm a Tea Party guy, proud Tea Party guy. I love the Tea Party. And I think that we have some important ideas that are being infused to the Republican Party. And some I know you disagree with, but there's some you agree with, I bet, on NSA spying and privacy and the fact that both parties have an alliance on foreign policy where they agree on so many issues. I mean, Libya, you saw that Marco Rubio agrees with Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama on the idea of toppling Assad, which would have caused chaos in that area of the world. It would not have brought more stability. There are Democrats and Republicans who agree that they wanted to topple Assad, and I don't agree with that. I don't think every Republican agrees with that.
And with Libya, it was brain fart.
Oh, yeah, Gaddafi.
Gaddafi, yeah, thank you.
Right, and that discussion about Gaddafi, I think, was eye-opening. And Marco Rubio, I don't think he made much sense. We talked about, obviously, look, Gaddafi was, part of the Pan Am bombing. We know that, in the bombing of Americans in Germany. I mean, we know that. But
well, he essentially confessed to it and made reparations back, a couple of years before we took him out.
Nobody is saying that he was a great guy, but what they were saying is that he stopped being the individual that got them on the state sponsors of terror list. They were removed from the state sponsors of terror list, and now what do the people of Libya have? They have a mess.
Yeah, well, a mess, and about half their country now is on the verge of becoming more of the Islamic State.
Right.
I mean, this is a real disaster. Where's the Republican Party at with trade? I've been having a number of conversations with Curtis Ellis, who runs this website, Obamatrade.com, I think it is. And, outspoken opponent of the TPP.
Yes.
The TPP, from the Republican point of view, and frankly, from my point of view as well, a massive surrender of American sovereignty, not just to other governments, which was arguably bad enough. I mean, that was the hit on the United Nations from Republicans. But surrendering our sovereignty to multinational corporations.
Sure. I think there are three positions with the Republicans. You've got protectionist. You have, the Donald Trump who wants to make all these guys to be bad guys. The Chinese, the Mexicans are all taking away our jobs and doing all these terrible things. So he is 100% protectionist in his rhetoric. And there are many Republicans that are there. You've also got free trade, people who are just 100% for free trade with the libertarian argument, more so that if these countries are devaluing their currency and they're selling us cheap goods, good for us as consumers. We get cheaper goods. But then you have this conflict where you have many who care about the Constitution and worry about the ceding of sovereignty, and they don't like these trade deals because they feel like we are ceding sovereignty to international organizations.
Well, and you mentioned our deficit. And our debt. We have an $8 trillion trade debt.
Yeah.
And that's $8 trillion we actually owe other countries. For our national debt, it's a little less than $1 trillion that we owe other countries. Most of it we owe to ourselves. And a lot of it's owed, within the government. It really shouldn't be considered part of the debt, like, the Social Security Trust Fund. Yeah. But why don't Republicans ever talk about that?
Well, I think some do. Not all of them do. I think you do have this, obviously you have business interests that are pushing the Republicans hard to support trade deals. The individual trade deals, they want to get them across the finish line. And K Street's, running to Capitol Hill to get these guys to pass them.
Yeah.
But there is some resistance. I mean, not all Republicans are on board with these trade deals.
Yeah. Brian Darling, real quick, are you worried for the future of your party given some of your candidates?
Well, if somebody like Rand Paul doesn't win, I'm very worried. I'm really worried about on foreign policy. That's my biggest concern.
Okay. Brian, great to see you.
Hey, great to see you. Thank you so much.
By. Brian Darling, he writes for conservativereview.com. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
You can tweet Brian H. Darling at Brian H. Darling and conservativereview.com or thirddimensionstrategies.com. Thanks. To watch more clips from our programs, hit the Watch More Videos button over here. And please be sure to hit the handy-dandy subscribe button so you'll always be up to date. Tag, you're it.